Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Yield Enhancement Network webinar for this afternoon called Making Enhancements Happen. This is my first attempt at chairing a remote webinar, so bear with me. I am Roger Sylvester Bradley. I am Head of Crop Performance with ADAS, and I work with the ADAS's crop physiology team to look after the yen family. And this webinar is most definitely for everybody in the yen family, as we're now thinking of it. Unfortunately, we can't hear you and we can't see you, but we very much want to communicate with you. So please have your keyboards ready and please feel free to put any questions, any comments into your questions box. We'll be trying to encourage you to do that all the way through this webinar. If you're familiar with tweeting, please use the hashtag #YenLearning. This webinar will be recorded, so that if you have to go away before we've finished, then you can refer to the end of it, or some people, this is a very inconvenient time, particularly if they're in the west of Australia or somewhere like that, so they'll be looking at it later. We do have basis and Neroso points, so please put your names and your number in the questions box and we will organize those Neroso and basis points for you. The program we have for today is entirely delivered by the yen crop physiology team. I'm going to do a brief introduction to the yens, just because I know we do have one or two people who are new to the yen. But then we're going to spend an hour pretty much dealing with the learnings, summarizing the learnings that we've managed to extract from yen data. Yens are all about collecting rigorous and trustworthy data and then getting understanding, building understanding to come out of those data. So that's what we'll be dealing with crop by crop. So going through cereals, oilseeds, peas, beans, grass, and then a couple of relatively new yens, yen nutrition and yen zero. And then at the end, for about 20 minutes, we're going to try and understand your views about how, and share our ideas about how we can get the yen family to work better and more efficiently and do more and more what you would like it to do. So without further ado, let me move into our first poll. So just try and understand who you all are. So the first poll is, what is your involvement with the yen so far? Are you a sponsor? Are you an entrant? Have you entered into one of our competitions or result schemes? Are you a supporter or advisor and been working with an entrant, or are you a visitor? Thank you very much. We've got nearly half of us are entrants, and we've got a reasonable number across from sponsors through supporters to visitors. So thank you very much for that. So now the next poll is how long you've known about yen. So you may just have heard about us this year and maybe just logging on to find out what we're like, or maybe a couple of years, or maybe longer than that. We've been going for 8 years, so you've had a good chance to hear about us. So most people have heard about us for more than 3 years. That's very encouraging, and hopefully we can build more and more people and engage with more and more people as we go forward. And this webinar is very much about going forward. So we're taking stock of what we've learned, but we want to move forward to understand what we can learn better. And what we absolutely must do is emphasize that the yens, and you can see 7 of them listed above this slide, and there are more yens, and we've got more in mind that we'll discuss later, but there are more than 40 sponsoring organizations, both organizations involved in agricultural supply, but very often involved in agricultural information and the whole knowledge environment in which we have to farm. And we're absolutely so encouraged by the number of people and number of organizations that have engaged with us and who don't just put money in, they put effort in. All of these organizations are putting effort in, supporting entrants to take their measurements or providing analysis or data or whatever it is. So it's very much a cross-industry collaborative exercise. And looking at the number of yields that we've managed to sort of monitor, and so we have, this is the number of yields together with data about understanding. So this is a database that's, as you'll hear, enabling us to more and more understand the productivity of cropping, not just in the UK now, but spreading across Northwest Europe. And we do have a yen in North America and the prospect of more yens in North America and also in Australia. So we're very much wanting to grow the yens. The yens have grown partly through more entrants entering each of the competitions, but also through there being more competitions. You'll hear about yen nutrition, which was new this year. That we've got another new yen, which we're not going to mention later. But if you're interested in studying oats and what's causing variability in yields of oats, Sarah Clark, one of our team, has a number of sponsors that are interested in launching an oat yen. So please get in touch with Sarah Clark at adas.co.uk if you've got any interest in oats. My job now is to again go through what we call the 4 pillars of the yen, and the yen is about, the yens are all about yield, and well, they've all been up till now, up till this year, about yield, but really the way we try and understand yield is a model for how we could understand any performance aspect of agriculture. And we begin by needing the concepts, the science that underpins the way we think about, in this case, productivity of crops. And we do that in our team because our team are all PhD level people who've really studied crop physiology and have written about crop physiology in these guides that try and describe crops in numbers, in data terms. But then the need for the yen has been absolutely clear because in farming people don't actually take those measurements. So that's what we've been doing. The majority of our effort in the yens has been to take the measurements that will explain the yields, and that's what we report in the big long reports that we give to every entrant at the end of the year. But then there are 2 more absolutely fundamental steps, pillars, that enable us to build the understanding. First of all, we get our results, and of course our yields are not up to the theoretical potentials that we calculate as being possible. So we have to have ideas and make designs for what we could do better. And that's very much an essential part of what we have to do. But then we can never be absolutely sure that those ideas are right. The ideas might be products, they might be practices, but whatever it is, we need to test those if there's any uncertainty about them before they become part of our knowledge base. And that's very much the way the yens and any similar network that we're launching is going to work in the future. And you're going to hear about a brand new one about carbon footprinting. But to me, the best exemplar of what of the way we're working in practice is I can take it from a slide that Bob Bulmer used on Monday when he described how the Hutchinsons, who were in the Yens from the very beginning, sponsored us all the way through. They're the main advisory organization that's been involved in the Yens. And what Bob showed was this, that in 2012, before we began, really within Hutchinson's, the focus was fairly narrow, trying to cope with weed control, disease control, pest control, and nutrition as separate exercises, but without much integration. They didn't really pay a lot of attention to roots and soil, and they were relatively happy with 11 tons per hectare. Now, it's a completely different way of thinking within Hutchinson's and a way of communicating with Hutchinson's clients, that it's all about capturing these resources on which our crops depend, that the potentials of those crops are way and above 11 tons per hectare. If they're just light limited, more than 20 tons. If they're water limited, probably a bit less than 20 tons. That, of course, there's a huge amount of variability. About half of it, though, is not to do with the weather. About half of it is, if you like, controllable. So the importance of the farm factor and other husbandry factors, and trying to tease those out of this obviously huge amount of variability that we have. So what they've got now in Hutchinson's is sort of an holistic approach rather than a disaggregated approach, where they're trying to grow canopies of the right structure that last a long time, and they have root systems on soils that can feed those the photosynthetic canopy. And that, in the end, is going to give Hutchinson's clients the sort of resilience and the appropriate attitudes to risk that are necessary in farming nowadays. So that's my introduction, and I've only slightly overrun. So now what we're going to do is to focus on all those data, those 2,000+ yields, and all the data that we've collected to try and explain it. And Daniel's going to start dealing with the data we've collected on cereal crops. So Daniel, over to you.
Thanks, Roger. Just to check you can hear me first, because I have had problems with this before.
I can.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the cereals, the cereal yen that we've been having for running since 2012. We've got this back again yet? Great. So we now have over 1,200 yields in the cereal yen since that point over the last 8 years, which is a really fantastic resource, because it's not just the yields we've got, it's a whole database, a whole data set of the weather and the soils and crop information and grain information that we get from the grab sample and everything else. So really that gives us that ability to try and understand what's really driving this variation in yield, as well as you as entrants getting that information back in your reports, seeing how you compare to other people. So that analysis of that database, we did a fairly thorough job in 2018, 2019, trying to look at that variability using a statistical analysis, a REML analysis. And that's where Roger talked about this kind of this farmer factor really coming through, that there's a lot of variation out there that just seems to be consistent to farms. There are farms that are consistently doing well, and they're doing well not because of something that we can find about the weather or the soil or cropping information that explains what they're doing. It's something above that. It's a farmer factor thing. So that's what we've kind of taken us to thinking about this difference is really being much more about attention to detail than they are about, you know, the products that you're using or how much you're spending. But having said that, there is all this variation out there, and our job, I think, really is to try and understand what it is that people are doing that's leading to the higher yields, what is driving this variation in performance. And so we can look at that. So we can look at these associations between all of these different, you know, sort of 200 different metrics that we have in the yen. We can look at how yield or other factors of performance relates with those. But we have to remember that they are associations. It's not necessarily inferring a cause and effect. could just be that it's saying something else indirectly about the growers are doing something different. But it highlights the good questions and in areas and priorities that we should be looking at further. And so if we look at all of the yields that we've had in the end here and looking at them against their biophysical potential yields that we can calculate, we see we've got variation in yields from below 4 tonnes a hectare to over 16 tonnes a hectare. But by and large, well, no crops that we're seeing are really exceeding their biophysical potential by a lot. We have some which are just about at it, but for nearly all of the crops, there's a really significant yield gap still between the yield that's achieved and the yield that is theoretically possible. And for any given biophysical potential, there's a whole range in yields that are being achieved. So looking at the data to try and ascertain what's driving that, we did a complete thorough job of the data analysis from up until 2018, 2019, and I've done a quick job of looking at 2020 to check that with the 2020 data included, it still holds up. But what we see is that there are yields increase with latitude. So the further north you are, the higher yields there generally are. So Scotland's generally yielding more than England. From weather factors, dry winters come out actually more strongly than wet summers. Okay, so actually having a dry winter is what really seems to be associating with the higher yields. Stressing that importance, I think, of establishment and achieving rooting, deep rooting through that winter period. Cool, bright summers and bright springs are also positive. And we see higher yields after break crops. Looking at the soil, then as we'd expect, water retentive soils yielded more from sands through to soils, so the chalky soils where it might be shallow, but there's a lot of water being made available from the chalk underneath. We tend to see larger yields where we've got a history of manure use, but interestingly, though, in the data there's this association. We have to stress it's an association with lower yields and with cover crops. There's a positive association with soil pH and soil P, but no association with soil organic matter. And that's one of the things that surprised me the most out of this data, because that's one of the things I was expecting and hoping that we would find here, a strong association between soil organic matter and yield, but that doesn't come through in the data so far. There's little difference between cultivation systems. In terms of crop nutrition and protection, we do see an association with nitrogen fertilizer rate and also the number of nitrogen applications. But it's worth stressing that that's relatively weak. So the effect is about at the break-even ratio. So it kind of implies that the farmers who are in the end are applying about the right amount of nitrogen. There's association with nitrogen fertilizer form that has showed liquid UAN fertilizers to be associated with lower yields. But interestingly now, when there's including sulfur in that liquid product, then that difference disappears. There's no difference between liquid with sulfur and ammonium nitrate or urea. But there's no associations with other nutrient fertilizers. There's a really strong association with PGRs, and there are also associations with fungicide applications, both number and fungicide crop spend. We don't see any association with insecticide use or herbicide use. In terms of the crop characteristics, then this is the kind of message that really comes through, is that the large yields tend to come from large crops. So where we've got lots of ears, big shoots, tall shoots with a large biomass, and also a high straw nitrogen concentration, which again is interesting because it's totally independent, and it maybe relates to the fact that these canopies are surviving for longer and that they're not being, the grain isn't taking the nitrogen out of the straw. So our flag leaves and canopies that live for longer. But obviously large crops require careful management, so we need to be very mindful of the disease risks and nodding risks if we are aiming for large crops. Grains per ear and grain size are also important. And so this is really, and it's also kind of, this whole thing has led us to develop this concept of crop momentum, where maybe we can keep crops going and balancing that and driving both source and sink. Getting the source and that driving the sink, and then as a continuous feedback loop through the season. Okay, so in summary, I think 15 tonnes a hectare is possible almost anywhere if your soil can provide enough water. It's less about what you spend and much more about attention to detail, which is a really important farmer factor. Another thing that Roger will come back to is that in the data we see nutrient deficiencies common in looking at grain nutrient concentrations. But the key thing of large yields coming from large crops and developing this concept of crop momentum. And that concept of crop momentum was something that we looked at, and this comes back to the last point of the 4 pillars that Roger talked about in terms of testing. So we had this project we call yen yield testing, using our agronomics approach to working with yen farmers to test some of the ideas which would come out of the yen that might be associating with higher yields, and testing those in what we call these farmer innovation groups, so testing them together in a coordinated way. We finished that project this year, and the reports of all of those studies are on the yen website, so you can find those on the yen website. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, very much. Very good, and we've got I think time for a question. So the question, I'm not sure that we've got time to answer it, but it's a good question. What sort of research should we be doing if we're going to understand the farm factor?
I mean, that's a really good question and a really big question, I think. And we've made stuff. I think there's as much of it is about the social side of this as well as the the physical and the chemical. I think there's that understanding that interplay between almost psychology and social capital and or the sociology of what drives performance with what's actually happening on the ground in terms of because you can't just wish for a higher yield. There must be something biologically and chemically and physically that's happening. So I think understanding that interface is something that we need to do. But yeah, we need lots of funding to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back and I think I'll refer to that when I speak about nutrition, because what we're doing in yen nutrition does actually test one element of the farm factor. So let's move on now to Sarah. So Sarah Kendall is now going to talk about what we've learned from the oil seeds, and we're lucky to have been funded to do an analysis of the database. So Sarah will tell you about that.
Thanks a lot, Roger. So good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be back talking about the data that we've been looking at for oilseed yen. So in the next 5 minutes or so, I'm really going to summarise the analysis that we've done looking at the oilseed yen data, which was also funded by AHDB, so we're grateful for that funding. And just to clarify that this analysis covered 3 harvest years, so 2017, 18 and 19, and we hope to be able to add in the data from the 38 oilseed rape crops that we obtained in 2020. So this analysis was focused on 151 yen yields, which came from 92 farms. These were generally located in the UK, but you can see on the map here that we also had some Danish crops as well. And the average yield for this data set was 4.8 tonnes per hectare. So clearly well above the national average for oilseed rape yields in this country. And just to really highlight again that it's a multivariate data analysis, and what it allows us to say is we can show associations between factors and yield, but we cannot say that a particular factor caused high yield. So it's good to remember that message. So we've talked a little bit about potential yield already, and what we've seen when we look at the oilseed potential yields is that these tend to be 2 to 3 times the national average. So there is lots of scope for increasing yield. But of course, actually at the moment, this poses a significant challenge, mainly because of the impact that cabbage stem flea beetle is having, firstly on establishing rape crops, and also the impact that larval populations in the spring can have on yields. Oilseed rape is a sink limited crop, so the most important yield component is maximising seeds per metre square. And to do that, there needs to be focus on trying to optimise the canopy size at flowering. If a crop has set a lot of seeds, the next challenge is that these seeds need to be well filled to ensure that the potential for that crop is met. And when we've looked at the data from 2020, what's interesting is that the bright conditions in April have allowed crops in some cases to set a huge number of seeds, and then really they've had a significant challenge in filling those seeds. And in some cases, the 1,000 seed weights were particularly low. So in order to maximise seed filling, we should be thinking about prolonging the canopy life and looking for longer green tissue duration, especially in the leaves where the majority of photosynthesis takes place. Another aspect that contributes to helping a crop to maximise seed filling is to ensure that there's enough water storage. So making sure that the crop isn't running out of water at these crucial developmental phases is important. So one of the associations that we were able to determine from our analysis was that there is a negative association between seed rate and yield. So we saw higher yields from lower seed rates. So plant spacing is clearly important. So we are recommending a target of 25 to 40 plants per metre square where conditions allow. And clearly establishing crops with low seed rates can be challenging and risky when there's uncertainty in terms of weather and also from cabbage stem flea beetle. But what we've seen is that it tends to be large plants with many seeds that perform particularly well. It's important to optimise disease control and nutrition. And so some of the significant associations that we've seen coming out of the data include a positive association with the number of fungicide applications and also a positive association with the number of nitrogen applications. And it may be that increasing the number of nitrogen applications provides greater control and contributes to building an optimum canopy, but also in maintaining it as well. Our analysis from a nutritional point of view has also indicated that avoiding phosphorus and magnesium deficiency is particularly important. And we've seen this coming out when we look at some of both the soil analysis and the seed analysis data. So we think using seed analysis along with soil and tissue testing can be really useful to try and identify the limiting nutrients. I just want to highlight that we're really keen that oilseed yen remains relevant for many growers, and actually obviously establishment in 2020 has been much better than we've seen over recent years, so that seems to be a positive start. But we've introduced an establishment beauty contest into oilseed yen, and this has different drilling date categories. And we've also increased the information that we're capturing around the establishment period. So what we really want to try and do is use oilseed yen as a vehicle for trying to improve our understanding of how we can successfully establish oilseed crops in this country. And this has been funded by AHDB. There's still time to get involved, and really we want to capture data from a range of crops for this, for us to be able to aid our understanding. So you can find out more information on the oilseed yen web page of the yen website. And I'll just finish again by acknowledging and thanking all the oilseed yen sponsors.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Very good and quick and at a time. Can you say something more about the nutrition? You said avoid deficiencies. Did that mean there was an association between one aspect of nutrition and yield?
Yeah, so what we've seen is from a soil perspective that there's an association between the soil P index and yield. So higher yields were achieved on soils with a higher P index. There was a less strong association for magnesium in the soil, but it was still apparent. And then when we look at the seed nutrition data, both phosphorus and magnesium come out there as being associated. So higher levels of phosphorus and higher levels of magnesium in the seed are associated with higher yields. And I think there's been, you know, we've had lots of discussion since we've been doing oilseed yen about magnesium, and actually, you know, how we can understand more about products and rates and timings to get that magnesium nutrition right.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, that's very good. Let's move on to the pulses. So Tom Wilkinson took over the management of our pulse yens, I think a year ago, Tom, and I think it's been a steep learning curve, but anyway, together with the PGRO, you've done your best, and you're about to tell us about it. So please, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. As Roger just mentioned, the pulse yens, the P yen and the bean yen, two separate yens, they're both in collaboration with PGRO. As a disclaimer, we are yet to have our winter results meetings for the Pulse Yen networks. These are taking place early next week. So I'm not going to go into detail about messages from the analysis. We haven't been able to do the same type of in-depth analysis that has been done in the cereal and oilseed yen in the Pulse Yens yet. But we will be talking about some of the associations that are starting to come through the data set so far on Monday and Tuesday. And just kind of as an advertisement, if anybody is interested in joining either the P yen or the bean yen for the 2021 season, then you'd be more than welcome to join our meeting early next week and take part in the discussion about the data set so far. So today I'm going to give an overview of the development of the P yen and the bean yen and where we are today. So the P yen has been running for 5 years. We've had 65 completed yields over these 5 years since 2016. The bean yen has been running for the past 2 years, and we've had 52 completed yields for the bean yen. So when developing the P and the bean yen, we started off by developing P and bean specific yield potential models based off the cereal and oilseed potential yield models. This was, again, alongside PGRO, helped us develop these models, and we estimated different parameters for light inception in peas, in winter beans, and spring beans. And we also altered the parameters for radiation use efficiency and water use efficiency to reflect the fact that these crops both fix nitrogen, and we also set limits for harvest index and rooting depth. Throughout the development of these yens over the years, we developed specific protocols. So, for example, in the bean yen, we measure harvest losses. We developed how we process the grab samples so we can learn most about pea and bean physiology. And what's different about the pea and bean yen is that there's an in-depth data collection on a core set of entries. So for the P yen, there's an independent pea agronomists who helped us develop the protocols, and also collects an in-depth amount of data on a core set of entries. And in the bean yen, there's also a project that's run by Hummingbird where they collect quite a lot of data that feeds into our data set as well. We also have some specific analyses for the pea and bean yen that's not seen in the other yens. So this includes foot rot analysis by PGRO, and insect damage analysis in beans by PGRO again, and also quality analysis, as quality is obviously important in these types of crops. So when we look at the potential yields that we estimated in 2020 using our developed models, we found that the pea yields across the UK, we estimated these to be between 6 and 10 tonnes per hectare. And for spring beans, this was 9 and 14 tonnes per hectare, and winter beans 9 and 16 tonnes per hectare. The actual yields of peas ranged from less than 1 to more than 5 tonnes per hectare in 2020 in the pea yen, or 10 to 60% of yield potential. And in the bean yen, the yield potential was less than 10 to 57% of yield potential. This is quite a wide range of yields, and you've probably heard this before and you'll probably hear this again, but it shows that there's a lot of scope for improving yields in these crops. And the wide range of yields, I think that's important to our data set, because it's important to stress that the pea yen and the bean yen, they're not competitions. We're really interested in learning as much as we can about these crops. And that comes from a wide range of yields and collecting information from all different types of sites and things that happened over different seasons. So that's where we are. We're starting to find some interesting things coming out in our analysis, and really starting to build momentum in the data set and starting to see some associations that we think are explaining some of these yields now. So it's a great time for anybody to join the pea and the bean yen. And of course, if you're interested in 2021, then please let us know, and you'll be able to come to the meetings on Monday and Tuesday. And I'd like to say a great thanks to all our sponsors and all our entrants.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's interesting that you've got 2 yens here, and they sort of started in sort of different ways, didn't they? I mean, I just wonder whether you could sort of say, because the bean yen has almost caught up with the pea yen in yields. You've got any feelings about sort of how you could get them to grow? Because obviously the more data, the more we'll learn.
Yes, yeah, of course. So the pea yen, the first few years of that this was before I started ADAS, but it was really thinking about in-depth analysis on crops. And we measured, the measurements we took were quite different, and they were specified on a much smaller set of growers than they are now. I guess the bean yen has benefited from some of the learnings that we've had from the pea yen over the years, so that's been able to have a much sharper increase. And of course, beans have perhaps the number of entries that we've had reflects the unfortunate reduction in oilseed rape area that we've seen. But I do think it's becoming apparent that pulse crops are really important in the rotation. They're really good break crops, and there's a lot to learn about them. And we'd really like to start getting some benchmarks for our report, so we can really kind of start to give people an idea of what's limiting yield.
Yeah. Well, this isn't a question for you, but someone's saying, where's potato yen? I mean, the answer to that is we do have a potato yen, but it's only just starting, and it's being organized from the NIAB. So the NIAB is the right port of call if you're interested in the potato yen, and I'm afraid we won't be I'm not aware that they've actually had any entries in 2020. Hopefully they will in 2021. But anyway, thank you very much, Tom. And so now we're going to move away from seed crops, and Pete's going to talk about what we've learned about grass. So over to you, Pete.
Thank you very much. Well, the Grass Yen has now been running for 3 years, and it focuses on silaged forage. We expect the entrants to measure the yield of 2 of their silage cuts. We measure the crop performance in terms of 2 things: the total dry biomass per hectare and the total energy content per hectare, because we don't want to produce high yields of simple biomass. We want high quality biomass. So that's the focus of our Grass Yen. So over the 3 years, we've had 77 crops so far, and there's a wide range of yields, as you can see in the blue columns there, ranging from less than 3,000 kilograms of dry biomass per hectare to more than 13,000 kilograms of dry biomass per hectare per cut. The orange dots represent the potential yield for each of those crops, and you can see that there's just no relationship between the two. And this tells us that the high yielding crops aren't high yielding simply because they're being grown in a favourable environment. They're high yielding because of the skill of the farmer. So some of the findings so far are that we've measured some very high forage yields in each of the 3 years, and some of these years include some very challenging years, including 2018, which had a very cold spring followed by a drought. The highest yield we've seen was in 2019, when we saw a yield of almost 19 tonnes per hectare from a first and second cut combined. And this had an energy content of just over 200 gigajoules per hectare. This yen has also developed a yield potential model, and it estimates potential yields over the whole season of 18 to 35 tonnes per hectare of biomass. And by season, we mean from February to the end of September. On average, our first and second cuts achieved a similar percentage of potential yield of about 55%. But we have had 5 crops who achieved more than 90% of potential yield. So it does show that it is possible to get close to these high potential yields. We find an association between crops which had a low percentage of potential yield with dry conditions, which tells us that shallow rooting is a major constraint in many forage crops. We didn't find any association between age of lay and the yield. We didn't see any trade-off between the yield and the metabolizable energy content, but it is worth saying that our potential target for metabolizable energy content is 13 megajoules of energy per kilogram of biomass, and we're not getting that close to it. Only a few entrants were getting more than 12 megajoules per kilogram. 62% of the crops had a relatively low soil K of less than the target of 2-. And when we look at the associations there, we find that crops on a K index of 0 were yielding more than 1 tonne per hectare less than the crops on a higher K level. All our crops are analysed with forage analysis, and this is showing some very interesting results, particularly for the nutrient content, but it looks like quite a substantial proportion of the crop's yield is limited by the lack of one or more nutrients. So, for example, we found that 74% of the crops had a sulfur concentration below the threshold given in RB209 of 0.25%. And for other nutrients such as P and K, there are also a significant number of crops which are below the critical threshold. So our aspirations for 21 are to scale up the competition and the network, to have more than 50 fields entered into the competition. Our biggest challenge is efficient measurement of yield of forage. At the moment, we use quite a laborious method of manually weighing lengths of swath, but we have just finished a 2-year project with John Deere, who are sponsors of Gracien, in which we've been evaluating yield monitoring technologies from forage harvesters, and these show that we can get reliable yield measurements from these which are comparable with the methods we're using at the moment. So using these methods will allow us to scale up significantly the Gracien. We want to expand the benchmarking of crop management inputs. We want to do more with the tissue nutrient analysis, particularly giving guidance about which nutrients the forage crops might be lacking. We want to expand the reports to include greenhouse gas emissions per hectare and per unit of production. And Christina Baxter will talk more about this shortly. And we want to get more experiments leading on from what we're finding to test ways of overcoming these constraints. We're always on the lookout for more sponsors and supporters, so if you are at all interested, then please get in touch with me. And finally, when we, the steering group, met a few weeks ago, we concluded that we would like to expand into other forage crops, particularly forage maize, and it's quite possible that we'll develop this network into a forage network. And it remains for me to thank all of the supporters and sponsors of Gracien for their continued support. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete, very much. Yeah, we've actually got a question about your last point on this slide, which is, what about maize? I just wonder whether you could sort of say something about what it takes to get a yen started, because, it doesn't happen easily, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it takes some sponsorship, really, because there's quite a lot of legwork to get a yen off the ground, and that you need to develop firstly a yield potential model which is plausible. So some legwork is needed to get that moving. We need to get a process of reliable measurements. That's very important, and some farmers who are willing to get involved in what we would probably start as a pilot. Yeah.
And we do actually have, as Dan has now said in the chat, we do have a pilot going for potatoes with and cuff. Yeah. Okay, Pete, thanks very much. So it's over to me now, and so if I click onto the next slide, it's my job to talk about a new yen that we launched this year. And you've heard that there's a lot of the conclusions coming out of the other yens that invoke issues to do with nutrition. And the more we've looked at nutrition and looked at the ways that our entrants are managing nutrition, the more we feel that nutrition needs support. And that's the aim of yen nutrition, is to build a good database that provides helpful nutritional intelligence, and really the basic evidence for this has come from the cereal yen, where in 2016 we started, instead of just analyzing the harvested grain for protein, which of course everybody does if they're at all interested in a quality market for their grain. We analyzed it for everything. In fact, if you're going to analyze for anything other than protein, you can actually, it's as easy to analyze for 12 nutrients as it is for 2 nutrients. So we analyzed all the grain from, and it's now amounted to 938 crops for all 12 nutrients. Now, we don't have critical thresholds for all 12 nutrients. We only have certain thresholds for 4 nutrients, NP, sulfur and manganese, but we have some sort of less certain thresholds for potassium and for zinc and copper, and the one I've forgotten, which I'll remember in a minute, magnesium. But what the conclusions from analysing those 938 samples is that actually it's a surprisingly small minority of crops that escape any suspicion of deficiency altogether. So the vast majority, over 80% of those crops, were deficient in one nutrient, and more than 50% were deficient in more than one nutrient. So, and the most common deficiencies were in were phosphorus, which is the threshold we have most confidence in, but then all the macronutrients other than calcium had more than 25, affected more than 25% of the crops. And of the micronutrients, there are 6 micronutrients, of which you can only see 3 there, because we only know about 3. That it was manganese that was most commonly deficient. So deficiencies seem to be remarkably common. Hence, instead of what we've done, and partly because of this farm factor, what the yen does is generally focus on one field per farm. But what we're doing in yen nutrition, because nutrition is definitely something that could differ farm to farm, we're looking at least 6 fields per farm and all 12 essential nutrients. And we're just in the throes of sending out reports at the moment with people who've been in yen nutrition this year for the first time, should have received first of all an offtake report. So we calculate the offtakes, so you get exact offtakes of each of the macronutrients. And we also do a benchmarking exercise, because of course nutrition is something that could easily change from season to season. So we think there's big value, rather than in just comparing with fixed critical levels that have come from experiments, to see how your value compares to everybody else's value. And Daniel will talk a bit more about benchmarking and the value of benchmarking and how we might develop benchmarking in the future. But if you're interested in engaging in yen nutrition, we don't have a review of the data yet. We're still processing the data, but there will be a review. If you join yen nutrition, there will be a review available to you early next year in February. So I'm very excited about this. It's one of the things that really keeps me nose to the grindstone, because I really think we've got a lot to learn about crop nutrition. So if you're at all interested, please go on, again, the yen website, under projects, you'll find yen nutrition, and there's a lot of information there over and above the information that encourages you to register. There's a lot of frequently asked questions, and you can really find some of the answers, I hope, that you need, that you probably need before you engage. So I'm just going to double check to see whether we've got any. So there's a question here from David Clark about how much was the nutrient deficiency correlated to soil deficiencies, and is it soil deficiencies, or is a problem with plant not being able to access nutrients, e.g. due to poor soil structure? And that's a really good question. And the answer, David and everybody, is that clearly when you're analysing grain, it basically tells you about everything. It integrates everything. It integrates the availability from the soil, the efficiency of the products that you happen to apply, and the efficiency of your root system and of the uptake system that your crop happened to have. So we do find positive associations between grain phosphorus and soil phosphorus, but it's pretty rough and pretty variable. So we get a lot of crops that are actually adequate for soil P, but apparently for some reason, and we really don't know the reason, they didn't get hold of enough phosphorus. So there's a lot to learn about this, and I would encourage you to certainly don't regard grain analysis as an alternative to soil analysis. Grain analysis is a very useful adjunct to soil analysis and leaf analysis. So that's probably enough, because otherwise we won't have any general discussion before we get to thinking about the mechanisms for the way the YENs work and how we make them work better. So we're now going to think about a brand new yen. So I talked about a yen that was brand new in 2020, and Christina's going to talk about a yen that's going to be new next year. So over to you, Christina.
Great. Thank you very much, Roger. And good afternoon, everybody. So my job over the next few minutes is to introduce to you the newest member of our yen family, which is yen 0. So over the next few minutes, I'll talk about why we're establishing yen 0 and how we hope to use this new network to address the current issue of reducing the environmental impact of our farming systems, and also how we hope to use the current yen framework to derive solutions around this. So as many of you will be aware, the NFU aspires to achieve net zero farming in England and Wales by 2040. And net zero doesn't mean that we need to quash all our emissions associated with agricultural productivity, but we do need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in addition to offsetting some of these emissions through carbon sequestration. And part of the solution to achieving net zero is improving our production efficiency, so increasing crop productivity on land that's already in agricultural production without big increases in inputs. So as we've talked a lot already, and how we continue to discuss throughout the YENs, in that we are striving to reach our crop yield potentials, and this discussion is still relevant when we talk about net zero. But with that aside, the first step to managing your carbon footprint and identifying the hotspots within your systems that's really driving your environmental impact is that you need to measure it. And there are a number of tools in which you can do this, and I'm sure many of you are aware of them, or if not, have actually had experience of using already. And the most popular of these tools are listed here. So this includes the Cool Farm tool, the Farm Carbon Toolkit, and AgriCalc. And it's really important to emphasize that yen 0 isn't being designed to replace these resources, but it's actually, we're hoping that it will exist alongside them to act as a resource for people to directly compare their carbon footprints against each other, and also for the network to act as a platform for the net zero community to discuss issues around research and the calculations we're using to derive these footprints. Because the process of calculating carbon footprints currently doesn't allow for this direct comparison, and there's a number of reasons why. One of these is that the values that are used to calculate these greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with on-farm activities can differ between tools. And this may be because they're more relevant to a global scale or a regional scale, such as the IPCC tier data. And also the activities that are considered to calculate the total carbon footprint associated with your farm production system will differ between tools as well. And also the life cycle assessment methodology can change between tools. So some tools may be more comprehensive than others in that they consider all emissions from cradle to grave. So for example, some tools may consider emissions associated with the breeding of livestock that are brought into your farming system, whereas other tools may be less comprehensive and just consider emissions that originate from within the farm gate. Additionally, tools may or may not consider carbon storage or sequestration in the farming system to help reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and your carbon footprint. And finally, tools may differ in terms of the time periods they consider when calculating the carbon emissions associated with bringing land into agricultural productivity. So with these factors considered, we do see that there's a space that yen 0 can fit into, which can allow for the direct comparison of carbon footprints between fields, farms, seasons, and more importantly, between your peers. And a key element in getting yen 0 off the ground is that the yen framework, as it runs already, actually allows us to calculate carbon footprints associated with yen crops and crop production. It allows us to do this already because of the types of information we collect from entrants. And carbon footprinting is essentially the process of calculating the greenhouse gas emissions associated with an activity such as soil cultivation or fertilizer application, and converting it into a common unit of kilograms of CO2 equivalent, using the global warming potential associated with the greenhouse gas that's released from that activity. And this is what gives us the emission factor. So because through the YENs, we ask participants that join our competitions to give us information on activities associated with crop production, and we can derive emission factors from peer-reviewed literature and the UK greenhouse gas inventory, we do actually currently have the ability to calculate the carbon footprint of yen crops on a per hectare and a per tonne basis. And we have actually already done this analysis, which was funded by the Morley Agricultural Foundation. So we analysed the greenhouse gas intensity per tonne of crop for past serial yen entries that were in the competitions between 2013 and 2019. And this is what this graph shows here. So I'll try and explain it to you in detail so you can fully understand what it's telling us. And on the left y-axis, you've got the greenhouse gas intensity in kilograms of CO2 equivalent per tonne of crop, and that's what's showing us in the different coloured bars. So the unit on the x-axis is moving from left to right in terms of low to high N2O emissions. And on the right y-axis, you've got the yield of the different serial yen entries, which are the yellow dots. And so the greenhouse gas intensity is actually split into the different activities of operations, shown in the dark brown bars, the seed rate used, the non-nitrogen fertilizer and the ag chemicals used in the yellow and the orange bars, and then finally the emissions associated with the nitrogen fertilizer manufacture in the dark blue bars, and the N2O emissions associated with the application of that nitrogen fertilizer in the light blue bars. And so what this graph is really telling us is that it's the manufacture of the nitrogen fertilizers and then subsequently the application of those nitrogen fertilizers to land that's really driving the environmental impact of crop production and of these cereal yen crops. You can also see a slight negative trend for high yielding crops tending to have lower carbon footprints. And what we've learned throughout the running of the YENs through the past 8 years is the real value in benchmarking and comparing yourselves against others and comparing crop characteristics against other farms and fields, so you can identify what might be limiting your crop productivity, or in this case, what could you do to improve reducing your environmental impact. And we hope that this data set will act as the basis for benchmarking greenhouse gas intensities of yen crops within the Yen Zero network, and that in the near future that the analysis of this data set will help us to identify how to achieve low carbon crops. So with it being said that we do currently have the ability to calculate carbon footprints of yen crops, we now want to bring Yen Zero to life as a network and as a resource for our current yen communities. And we now have the ability to do this from recent Innovate UK funding. So yen entrants, we hope, will be able to benchmark the carbon footprint of their different activities and ultimately the carbon footprint of their crops, so they can see in what areas of their crop production systems they're being efficient and in which areas they could improve. And so through bringing Yen Zero into our yen communities, we hope to bring to light that improved efficiency and productivity as part of the net zero solution, because this prevents uncultivated lands such as grasslands and woodlands where carbon's being stored in the vegetation and the soil. It prevents this land from being brought into agricultural production to meet global food demands, which then results in the release of this carbon. So how we see Yen Zero functioning is in a very similar manner to our other yens, in that we hope to generate learnings around reducing emissions through the interaction of farmers, their advisors, yen supporters and researchers. And this process starts with the science, which gives us these emission factors based on past data and trials. And a key element of Yen Zero is being transparent about the emission factors we're using, because this then allows us to share our methodologies and our learnings with the net zero community. And it also creates discussion around the accuracy and the suitability of these numbers as well. And so because we've got past data already that we can build from, we hope to create greenhouse gas emission targets for our entrants to strive towards. And through benchmarking, we hope to create discussion around solutions, whether those solutions be what participants are already using, or create solutions through the network that can then be tested by those that are part of the network, be tested on farm to see how significant they are in reducing emissions and achieving low carbon crops. And then these processes then feed back into the science to help align the research to improve our current emission factors and identify areas where more information or more data may be needed, such as clarity over soil carbon storage. So how can you get involved in Yen Zero? Well, Yen Zero is still in its development phase, and this is a positive thing because we hope to gain insight from our current Yen communities on how you would like to see Yen Zero shaped. We're also in discussions with stakeholders in the net zero community on how they see how Yen Zero can fit into the net zero community and be of value. So the web address there is how you can get in touch with us to say that you would like to be involved and you're interested in giving us ideas on how you would like to see Yen Zero shaped. And if you're interested in being involved in meetings further down the line where we discuss Yen Zero in more detail. Because ultimately, we want to see Yen Zero as a platform to help create common strategies, methodologies, and transparency around calculating carbon footprints in UK agriculture. We are currently working with AHDB to link Yen Zero with their Evidence for Farming initiative. So this initiative is synthesizing existing research and evidence around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing carbon storage. So we hope that this synthesis of evidence will create solutions that will then be fed into Yen Zero, and these solutions can be tested on farm to help us to achieve low carbon crops. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Christina. Well done. We stay on the line, and I think what we'll do, because we've got about 3 minutes now for some general discussion. I mean, I really think Yen Zero is a really good evolution of what we're doing in the other Yens, and it was so nice to have it demonstrated that you can actually use the same data for a different purpose. And in fact, that would be true for lots of different purposes. If we had a Yen gross margin, we could do a gross margin Yen, but we would need some expert economists to help us do it. So Sarah and Pete and Tom, are you going to join us?
Yes.
Meanwhile, and I'm afraid most of the questions seem to be for me, but anyway.
Lucky us, off the hook.
There's a question about whether we're going to be testing different fertilizer products, and most definitely that would be my aspiration. But clearly, what the way we're funding Yen Nutrition at the moment is just with a slight premium over the cost of the grain analysis. So that if you use Yen Nutrition, you pay a little bit more than you would if you had the grain just analysed by the lab, and that gives you all the benchmarking and all the reporting that we're doing. In the future, I think we're going to have lots of people with lots of questions about how they get adequate nutrients into their crops, and they'll have ideas, and the companies will have products, and it's a matter of bringing the people with the ideas and with the products together to see if we can fund some proper tests. But we do need proper, robust testing, and that needs to be either at a field scale, and probably best is at the field scale with something that's very soil related, rather than at a small plot scale. But
Roger, I think the question is also about accounting for the different carbon footprint of different fertilizer products. And Christina, I know you've been thinking about that a little bit. We do have some information that we can bring to bear to help to differentiate between products in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions associated with their manufacture.
Yeah, so there's a lot of detail that can be considered when trying to calculate an accurate carbon footprint around the manufacture of fertilizers. It depends whether the fertilizer has been produced abroad or within the UK. And I think to achieve an accurate number, so we can satisfy the fertilizer companies that we are representing their products accurately, is to be in direct discussion with those manufacturers to get information on their processes. But there's also other tools like the Fertilizer Europe calculator tool, which we can use where we don't have direct relationship with the manufacturers as well. So there are resources out there.
But I wonder whether the question might be, I mean, it does say different brands, but in fact, we do know about the different forms. So, you know, we've been testing ammonium nitrate versus UAN versus urea. I don't know whether Dan wants to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would say about nitrogen fertilizer is that when we first started doing these calculations 10 years ago, you know, the manufacturing emissions from ammonium nitrate were huge because of the nitrous oxide losses that you had in the manufacturing process. You know, they're pretty much half what they were 10 years ago now because of all the investment that the fertilizer industry in Europe, at least, has made, you know, to get those values down. So, you know, where there used to be, it used to be that urea actually from a manufacturing perspective was much better than ammonium nitrate. That's no longer the case. There's not that much to choose from urea and ammonium nitrate, both produced in the UK now in terms of their manufacturing emissions.
Okay, well, can anyone see any more questions they want to answer?
Well, there's a question there about whether the Yen Zero will help achieve a greater consensus between different methods of calculating greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, so that's for Dan, I think.
I mean, I think to me that's one of the real reasons for the whole point of Yen Zero is to try and get that kind of, you know, the Yen is about starting from the science and the metrics and being clear about those metrics and being open about the metrics is very much what we need to do and seeking to do here, so that we can get that consent, trying to achieve that consensus. So, and we can't do that alone. So working with AHDB, working with the academics and everybody else in this field is absolutely crucial. Also, just a plug that we will be talking about Yen Zero and all of this in more depth on an Agrotech Express webinar in January, where the details are about to be announced. You can find the details on the Agrotech E website.
Thank you very much, Dan. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a point about whether it's particularly different between Britain and Europe. I don't think we would say there is any significant difference between manufacture of fertilizers in UK or Europe.
Sorry, I thought I said EU fertilizer. Yeah. I hope I said that's what I said. I didn't mean to suggest that UK fertilizer is different to elsewhere in the EU.
Okay, well, I think we're just about at the right moment. If we can now switch from the technical side of this webinar to more the organizational and the engagement side of this webinar. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to Deval Patel, who has been the lucky or the unlucky winner of the appointment that we made at the beginning of 2020 of our first Yen manager. So Deval's going to, first of all, talk a little bit about what he's managed to do with Yen this year, and then Daniel will come straight after Deval and talk about what we're imagining we're going to do next in way of improving your engagement with the YENs. So over to you, Deval.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. So first of all, to answer your question about being lucky or not, I think I've been very lucky because what I've found in last 12 months is Yen community has a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of ideas, and a lot of ways where we can make arable farming much better. And I don't think, the last 12 months has pretty much gone past quite fast. So, and at that note, I would also like to mention that I've been talking to most of the members via email and phone calls, but this is the first opportunity to say hello in person. Afraid was not able to, none of us were able to go anywhere because of COVID-19. And I'm hoping that, next year this to change and we can meet in person. So in the next few minutes, what I would like to do with you is to emphasize what Roger mentioned at the start of the webinar, and is talk about engagement of yourself and passing the data to us in terms of, how do you find engaging with Yan, and how do you, find the data processing or data entry, which we do, and along with sample analysis. So to take next slide, please. So to start with, first of all, I would like to remind you that since last 1 year, we are now having a new website, and the new website is able to host various resources under resource section. We are engaging with all the sponsors, entrants via our network tab. And also we are highlighting various news activities in form of events and highlighting events with our partner organizations like AHDB and any other organizations like CropTech, etc. In the events page as well. So compared to what Yen was the year before last, we are hoping to engage much better with you and to take a step further and to interrogate how we are engaging with your data, which makes Yen what it is. I would like to ask you to take a brief poll. So next slide, please. So if you can please answer about how tedious is data entry for you in Yen. Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's fantastic. I think majority of you don't mind all the hard work, and you find it useful exercise. So that's a big thumbs up in terms of your engagement. And sorry, I think we lost the polls over there. So okay, there was a minority of people who would wanted the approach to have been a bit better. But moving ahead, what we want to do, or at least what we have started to do, starting with this year, is we have started to improve some of the processes to make it lean. And the reason to do this is to make sure that the data is reached to you in good time to make all those important tangible decisions. So I'm going to go step by step in how you can engage with Yen and what you have been doing through all of these different steps and processes. Next, please. So at the moment, you are engaging with us using Excel file. And of course, we remind you about monthly actions by sending out an email. And we share our views and any particular events happening and important thoughts for a particular year via newsletter. So what we are looking forward to do, at least from next year, is the online registration and data entry. We are hoping to take it online. The thought is to make sure that the information which you provide is less error-free. We are also able to capture the data in much more better way, and hoping to email you or chase you back less with passing your completed entry back. Next slide, please. So the next step in the EN process is about getting various analysis done. And soil analysis and leaf analysis are the key analysis which we tend to do before the grab sample analysis. And what this year we have thought to test is ask our partner organizations over here, Landcrop, to directly send you the report as soon as the analysis is complete. Year before last, in 2019, this was done by us. And what we have found is we have found some positive response by the members as they're able to receive the report in good time and also able to make all those tangible decisions very quickly. Looking at this, we are hoping to take this step forward by discussing the same approach with NRM, and if successful, we will be implementing the same process where as soon as the soil analysis is completed, you should be able to receive your report directly via them rather than waiting for us to email it to you. Next slide, please. So with the harvest and the grab sample analysis, what you might have found different for all the members who were engaged in 2019 is you were first sending all the samples directly to us, that is our processing center. We used to do the sorting and then send the samples to individual labs. We changed the process over here where we have asked all the entrants to directly send the samples to the lab, and this has made a bit of a difference because we are able to receive your samples as soon as possible, that is as soon as the analysis is complete, and this has been a big plus. So however, for 2021 we are of course going to continue with the process with the labs, but what we have found is the collection of yield information via yield forms and weighbridge tickets sometimes can get lost in post, or we are not sure when the post is going to arrive once it's posted. So to make these things more efficient, we are hoping to collect all of this information via our website where you can upload this information. So hopefully you should be able to pass your yields much more sooner and in much more efficient way. Next clip, please. One important thing which has been highlighted is the acknowledgement of sample receipts. So once you send the samples, unless you are surprised with the result, you are not sure if your sample has been received at the relevant center, either our partner organizations, that is NRM or Landcrop, or our Boxworth office, sorry, our Boxworth lab. So for 2021, we are reviewing the situation where we can log all the samples which have been received, and as soon as we log them, we should be able to provide you with an acknowledgement that we have received the sample. Of course, in 5 to 7 days, if you don't receive the sample receipt, you can chase with us to understand where the situation is, and if required, you can send a replacement sample. So we are reviewing this process, and we hope if all went well, then we will launch it for 2021 as well. Next clip, please. So finally, this year we were able to introduce automated report generation for cereal yen, and that has been a massive help because we are not only able to produce the report fast, but we are also able to send it automatically to all the growers, their sponsors, or their agronomist if they have help with their email address. This means that we can slowly start to look at a position where we are passing all the information via different routes to you in a much more fast way, and hoping that you are able to make those tangible decisions at different point of your crop. And even at the end of the year, when you are done with your harvest and you are thinking to do, when you're thinking to go ahead but to put the next crop in the field, we are hoping to implement the same automation process which we have got in place for cereal yarn with other crop yarns, and this should hopefully make the process much more efficient for the yarns as well. So overall, we have made a lot of changes to make things efficient in 2020. We are learning from it, and for 2021, we have further changes as I've shared with you in pipeline, and hope that you will find all of them useful If you have any further suggestions, then please pass it to us over here in the chat box, or please don't hesitate to email to us at yen@edasnet.co.uk. The important point which I would like to mention over here is the inspiration to do everything online was achieved via Yen Nutrition. And next slide, please. So in Yen Nutrition, which was launched this year, has been a massive success for Yen. And the whole process from registration to capturing of field data to generation of report is done online. The reports are generated automatically, and as soon as the data is received, data is stored in the database, reports are generated using the automated process and sent out to you as well. So we have learned a lot from Yen Nutrition, which we are hoping to implement for crops Yen. We are also hoping to make incremental changes in Yen Nutrition as well. And overall, I'm hoping that your engagement with Yen and the data in a way it is being received by us, or in a way that you are sharing with us, is only going to improve. Though, of course, we are doing all of these incremental changes, we are hoping to do also a step change in our approach. And to discuss this further, I'll pass it on to Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Deval. Okay, so I want to just talk about the, well, we've been talking to you for years saying that about improving the processes, so it's great to have Deval on board. Deval's made a great start at getting us into the 21st century. But we've also just been successful with some funding, some UKRI Innovate funding for a small 6-month project, which is the first time we've really got public support for building and helping us with the digital infrastructure that we really need to kind of aid the whole process that we have with the Yens, both from that data exchange perspective in terms of making it easy for you to share your data with us and you being able to access and edit that, but then also crucially with the dynamic, with what we're calling dynamic benchmarking, being able to, so we want you to be able to access these results and interact with them in a much more meaningful way, so that you can actually start to research the data. You become you're more connected to the data set, and you can start to actually become like a researcher yourself in terms of actually being able to ask questions to the data set rather than just having a static PDF report in front of you. So this funding, we're hoping, will help us to support this for all of the Yen family, but it also enables us to launch the Yen Zero. So this is why we've got this. We can talk about Yen Zero in the way that we're talking about it, in that we're committed to making something happen in the next year with Yen Zero, and using the developments we're creating here. So then the key to this is making benchmarking dynamic. So your existing report, you get all of these benchmarking diagrams, so I don't know, 60 or more of them in the, a lot more than that I think now in the current reports, where for any metric we're giving you the critical values if we know them, giving a benchmark value if there is one, and then you see then all of the data which is in the database. So both the median in the middle, the maximum and the minimum, and the middle 50% of data, and then we show where your entry sits on that, which is great if you wanted to see within that yen, within that year, how you compare to everybody else. But if we could do this online, we could do so much more. We could make it so that you could choose who you compare yourself to. So you might want to compare yourself by location. Say, I only want to compare myself to people in my region. So you might say, if you're in Scotland, say, and so you just compare yourself to Scottish entries, and you see that whereas before I was actually above average, now I'm actually, if I compare myself just to Scottish crops, I'm below average. Or you might say, I want to do it by soil type, and on a shallow soil, maybe you're doing very, very well on a shallow soil, or by variety, or by the yield level, comparing yourself to the top 25% of yields. So, like I said, I think we think that this could really revolutionize, if you like, the way that you interact with the yen, and increasing the value of what we're doing. So instead of just having to wait a year for a report that you can just look at and can't do anything with, you can really get engaged in the process and ask questions for yourself. And then Also then asking questions about, being able to thinking about whether you're comparing multiple fields at once, or being able to switch to different metrics. So easily be able to compare different metrics at the same time. So this is all stuff that we're thinking about at the moment and trying to make this work for you. But to help us with that, it would be really useful for us, because we think this would be fantastic. But what we really want to know is, do you want it? So we've got some polls. So it would just be really interesting to know whether you would be interested in doing this type of dynamic benchmarking, doing your data online and being able to interact with it. Is that something that you'd be really keen? Can you put a poll up, Jane? Is something that you'd be really keen to do? That you'd give it a try, but it's maybe not going to change everything for you. You'd give it you may maybe do it, or no, it's not actually something you'd be interested in at all. Okay, so that's fantastic. So we're not deluding ourselves. We are thinking in a way that hopefully would deliver something to you that would be of value if everybody says that they would engage with it. That's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so the next question we're going to ask is, what metrics would you most like to compare yourselves to on others? I mean, obviously we'd like to do it for everything, but if we can only do it for a few things, what would be the most important metrics for you to be able to compare yourself on? Would it be yields? Would it be gross margins, or some measure of profitability? Cost per ton, maybe? The greenhouse gas intensity that we're looking at with Yen Zero, nutrient content, which we're looking at with Yen Nutrition, or something else. And if it's something else, then please let us know, put it in the question box or send us an email. Okay. So yeah, this is what we've always been. Everyone always said to the Yen that yield is great, but what we really want to know is about the bottom line, the profitability. So over half of people wanting gross margins. So I mean, that to me is another endorsement, and that's what I hope we can get to that. But we've got to find a business model to make that work. Great. And the last question is, what factors would you most like to filter your comparisons by? So if you were able to interact with this data in this way, what are the things that, or what's the one thing, you can only choose one, what would be the one thing that you would do first, or that you would really want to be able to compare yourself with? Okay, so location, soil type, variety, yield level, so comparing yourself to the top 25% or whatever else, or something else. And yeah, so should we run that? And yeah, so really quite overwhelmingly, location and soil type really being the things to concentrate on there. That's what people are really kind of, that's really useful feedback on that to kind of to guide us in developing this over the next few weeks and months. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Well done, Dan. I'm
Thank
afraid
you, Roger.
we're running over.
We're running over. Well, what we really wanted to ask, just to round this up, was just for you to tell us what could we do better, and what else is there anything else you'd like us to be doing? So if there's anything you want to share with that, again in the question box, or letting us know by email or whatever, then we really want that feedback.
And including that, I mean, Deval's there and able to answer questions. So if there's anything organisational, we've already had a question about the reporting on barley versus the reporting versus on wheat. Any other issues, please do raise them. We want this whole thing to work properly, but I think we won't enter into spoken question and answers now, because really we should let people go for their tea or whatever it is they're planning to do next. So thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, Deval. And it's just for me, can we have the next slide, please, Katie? To just quickly summarize and ask for, we've already been asking for feedback, but ask for your feedback. So next slide, Katie. that I mean, just to summarize, I mean, when we held the awards a couple of weeks ago, I began by saying we do not apologize for studying yield first. I mean, of course, we're crop physiologists, so yield is what we're really interested in, but yield drives the viability of your businesses. Any rural business has to be productive if it's going to be resilient, and it's going to survive all the changes that we're facing in the coming years, months and years. And yield dilutes pollution. To be honest, the association of intensification with pollution is misplaced, and our data shows that there is a need for a better use of nitrogen and better use of fungicides and better use of all the other chemical aids that we have, but not necessarily a huge positive relationship between yield and the use of the total use of those things. So dilution of pollution is very much what yield does, and of course bigger crops fix more carbon and have the potential of sequestering more carbon. So and high yields save people needing to cut down rainforest cells anywhere else. So there are lots of reasons for yield to be the starting point, but as you've seen, we are now able, because of the enthusiasm of everybody engaging with us, to move on to other areas. I would just encourage you to believe that there are controllable aspects of farming, and that we are able, if we get enough data, to analyze what those are and tell you about what the most controllable bits of your production system are, and that's really the root of what we're trying to do, getting the science and the farming to work together. But keep monitoring. I mean, there is no way you can manage without monitoring. We're trying to provide the right metrics that are the most telling metrics to help you to monitor what you're doing on your farms. But all I've got to do now is to remind you that there are, in the next slide, please, Katie, a few more events. So that there are the two Pulse results meetings to be held next week, 4 o'clock on Monday, peas, 4 o'clock on Tuesday, beans. And then in February, the HDB holds its milling wheat webinars, and in the third one of those at 1 o'clock on the 25th, Thursday, the 25th of February, we have our Yen Wheat Quality Awards, and there you see the winners from 2018. So we're hoping to, or we know we will be, making awards of gold, silver and bronze for wheat quality on the 25th of February. Next slide, please, Katie. So the way you can interact with us, you're going to be sent an email within the next hour to ask for your simple feedback. But if you've got any more detailed suggestions, either write them in an email to yen@adas.co.uk or go onto our website, look for the information that you need, and communicate with us that way. You can engage in any of the Yens via that website. So thank you very much, everyone. The next slide, please, Katie. And thank you particularly, of course, to our sponsors. This is a very much a cross-industry initiative. We're hoping for the government is talking about engaging with and funding, helping to fund on-farm research. I would encourage all those organizations and all of you as participants in one of those organizations or in farming to be advocating on-farm research and funding to help the sort of things that we're doing in the Yens. But that's it. I'm sorry we've overrun by 10 minutes, but I hope you thought it was worthwhile. And may I wish you a good evening and all good wishes for the festive period, however you are able to spend it. So thank you very much and goodbye.